When Luna Caldwell, a wildlife photographer, plunged into the icy river to save a bear cub, struggling in the current, she had no idea that her reckless act would spark a mysterious bond that transcended the boundary between human and wild. This was not just a rescue. It was the beginning of a touching story about sacrifice, maternal instinct, and an unexpected friendship no one could have imagined. Under the honey-like morning sunlight streaming through the pine canopy of Montana's wilderness, Luna Caldwell walked briskly along the trail beside the icy river, her camera swinging on her chest like an inseparable extension of her body. To her, nature was home, and the remote forest paths were the only places where her heart could truly breathe. That day, the sun quietly pierced the thin mist. The air so still, Luna could hear each of her footsteps crunching on the old snow. She had just paused to adjust her lens when it rang out. A piercing cry, high and panicked. Filled with desperation, cutting through the roar of rushing water. Luna froze. It wasn't a bird, not the wind. It was the sound of life grappling on the fragile edge between existence and extinction. She spun around, eyes scanning the rapid flow below the rocky ravine. And then she saw it. A small grizzly cub, tiny and trembling, being swept away by the current. Its front paws flailed helplessly in the water, its little head repeatedly dipping beneath and resurfacing mouth open, but unable to make a sound. It was drowning. Luna didn't think. She dropped her camera to the ground and sprinted, her legs propelled by sheer instinct. Her heartbeat thundered as if it would shatter her chest. The freezing river tore into her as she plunged in. So cold, it stole her breath. The current yanked her under immediately, violently, but the cub's eyes, terrified, exhausted, pleading, kept her kicking forward. "Hold on! Hold on!" Luna muttered through clenched, chattering teeth. Just a few more meters. 1 meter. And then she reached it. The cub, shivering violently, clung to her with primal desperation. Its tiny claws tore into her thick coat, but Luna felt no pain. All she sensed was a fragile life clinging to survival. But the river wasn't done. It dragged them both further downstream, as if trying to erase every ounce of bravery from the earth. Then Luna saw it, a fallen tree bridging the river, a final chance. With every ounce of strength she had left, she kicked hard, stretched her arm out, frozen fingers brushing the coarse bark. Slipped. Reached again. Got it. She hauled both herself and the cub onto the mossy trunk, gasping, her chest ablaze. The wind sliced into her soaked skin, sending violent shivers through her. The bear cub curled in her arms, whimpering softly, a thread-thin sound. Luna held it tightly, blue lips whispering near its ear. "We're okay now. We're okay." But then her eyes lifted to the riverbank, where the dense trees cast heavy shadows. And from the distance came a deep, thunderous roar, low, wild, and primal, that froze her blood. Another creature had noticed the cub's absence, and now it had arrived. Its name was Nira, and Luna knew. What had just happened was only the beginning. The cold wind swept across the river like a warning. Luna remained motionless on the wet, fallen log, her body shivering from both the icy water and the creeping sense of something wild brushing against her skin. In her arms, the bear cub began to stir, letting out a soft whimper, a small sound, yet filled with fear. Luna looked up, and she saw her, standing motionless at the edge of the forest between snow-covered trees, was a massive, dark silhouette. The amber-yellow eyes of the mother bear gleamed under the dim light of the late afternoon. Nira, her large, muscular body loomed steady. Nostrils flaring, and the low growl from earlier had now become a deep, resonant rumble, a primal warning from a mother sensing a stranger's touch on her young. Luna swallowed hard. There was nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. She and the cub were stranded mid-river on a slippery, rotting log. One misstep, one lunge, and it would all be over. "It's okay," Luna whispered more to herself than to anyone else. She turned to the cub, now burrowing deeper into her jacket, its breath fast and shallow. It was too exhausted to stand on its own. Across the river, Naira let out another roar, a thunderclap from deep within her chest. One giant paw stepped closer to the water, her claws ripping at the earth. Luna drew in a long breath. She knew the worst thing she could do was appear threatening, or run. Though every instinct screamed at her to throw something, to leap off the log, to plunge back into the freezing water, she stayed. Slowly, she bent down, gently removing her arms from around the cub. Go back to your mama." Her voice trembled, but the cub didn't move. "Go on, little one," she whispered, tears stinging her eyes. "She's waiting for you." The cub hesitated, then slowly turned its head. A faint whimper escaped its throat. Then, hesitantly, it began to take small, shaky steps across the slick log toward the riverbank. Luna couldn't breathe. Naira didn't move. One more step. Another. Then, whoosh! The cub slipped. Luna cried out and lunged forward, but it was too late. Yet instead of falling into the water, the cub caught on a branch jutting from the log, saving it from plunging into the current. It clambered back up, wobbled, then continued. When it finally reached the riverbank, Naira lowered herself. In one fluid, tender motion that Luna could hardly believe, the mother bear pulled her cub close with one front leg, nudged its head into her chest. She sniffed, licked, and rumbled softly, as if whispering something sacred. Luna could only watch, overcome with emotion. Then Naira lifted her head. Those golden eyes found Luna's once more. No more fury, no more threat. Only something deeper, as if two wild souls, beast and human, had just shared a moment beyond language. A slight nod, a slow breath. And Naira turned away, the cub following close behind, the two disappearing into the shadow of the forest. Luna remained there still on the cold, wet log, trembling from both the chill and the miracle she had just witnessed. No one would believe her, but she knew something had changed forever. Luna returned to her small outpost just as the twilight began staining the horizon a deep red. Her steps were unsteady from exhaustion and cold, yet her mind remained sharp ablaze with the images she had just lived through of the reckless rescue in the frigid current. Naira's eyes, and that moment when the world seemed to hold its breath, as human and wild creature understood each other without a single word. She quietly rekindled the fire, wrapping herself in a thick blanket. Though warmth now covered her skin, Luna still felt cold inside. Not from fear, but from a sensation she couldn't yet name, a silent thread connecting her to that place. When night fell, everything sank into stillness. Luna sat motionless in a wooden chair by the window, gazing into the vast black forest beyond. She had taken thousands of photos of wildlife, spent months alone in nature, but tonight felt different. She wasn't alone anymore. A soft noise startled her. Was it the wind or... Luna stood, heart racing. She reached for the oil lamp and opened the outpost door. The warm yellow light spilled into the night like the only breath of warmth in a sea of icy darkness. She stepped outside. The wind whispered through the pine branches. Everything appeared quiet until a shiver ran down her spine. Luna turned. Among the silent trees just at the edge of the lamp's glow, a shadow stood. Naira. Luna froze. The mother bear didn't growl, didn't move, She simply watched, her gaze no longer wild, but deep still, like an ancient guardian returning to confirm the safety of this place. Then, without a sound, she disappeared behind the trees as quickly as she had come. Luna stood still, heart pounding. She backed into the cabin and shut the door. But that night, she couldn't sleep. Naira had followed her, not to hunt, but to protect. The next morning, Luna woke to a heavy feeling. On the ground before the outpost, large paw prints were clearly pressed into the snow. She bent down. There was no mistaking them. Naira had been there all night. Luna began to ask herself questions she didn't dare answer. Why had the bear followed her all the way back? Could it be that Naira felt she belonged here? The question drifted into the wind, but Luna knew this was no longer a chance encounter between woman and beast. This was the beginning of something deeper, a destined bond being woven between the shadows of the forest and the heart of a human. In the days that followed, Luna Caldwell lived in a strange state of heightened awareness. She still carried out her usual tasks, documenting the natural world through her lens, taking notes on the migrating deer herds, photographing the shifts in the winter ecosystem. But she never stopped thinking about the eyes of Naira, the mother bear under that moonlit night. A silent presence, yet one that carried great gravity. Each morning when Luna opened the outpost door, she would find fresh, large paw prints in the snow, circling the cabin, and then vanishing into the edge of the forest. Naira was still watching her, but it wasn't a threat. Luna knew that. There were no growls, no signs of a predator. Just presence, as if Naira was standing guard. One afternoon, as she followed the trail along the creek to check her camera traps, Luna came across something strange. She crouched down, slipped off her glove, and touched the snow. A deep, sharp claw mark. Very recent. It wasn't Naira's, nor was it from a lynx or a wolf. The claw marks were too wide, too brutal, and next to them, a few strands of dark fur curled by wind and frost. A chill crept down her spine. Luna placed the fur in her pocket and rose to her feet, scanning the thick canopy. It can't be a male grizzly. The thought made her heartbeat quicken. An adult male grizzly could easily pick up the scent of blood or the trail of a weaker female. If he was nearby, Naira and her cub were in danger. And so was Luna. She returned to the cabin faster than usual. The snow was thicker and night fell sooner. On the way back, the feeling of being watched returned. But this time, it wasn't like Naira's quiet vigilance. This was something else, hostile, slithering, oppressive. Back at the outpost, she locked the door carefully and lit the fire higher than ever. But that night, with the wind howling through the forest beyond, Luna couldn't sleep. One thought kept pounding in her head. Naira had followed her not just out of gratitude, but because something was coming. A threat she sensed ahead of time. And now, Luna was caught in its wake. The next morning, Luna made a decision. She would go deeper into the northern woods where she believed the answers might lie. But she didn't know. Someone else was following her tracks with a very different purpose. That morning, the sun was hidden behind a thick layer of gray clouds. Snow blanketed the deep forest, so silent that every dry snap of branches beneath Luna Caldwell's boots echoed through the valley. She carried all the necessary gear: camera, thermos, a hunting knife, and a flare gun. But the most important thing wasn't in her pack: intuition. And it told her something had shifted in this wilderness, something she couldn't ignore. Luna followed the faint trail leading deeper into the forest. The tracks left by Naira, the mother bear, had begun to fade, but newer prints appeared, heavier, deliberately circling a specific area. She froze at the sight of a broken branch marked by deep claw grooves. There was no mistaking it. A male grizzly bear was nearby, not passing through, marking territory. And then ahead, in an open patch of woods, she saw something that froze the blood in her veins. There on the snow-covered ground, no more than 30 meters away, stood a massive, full-grown male grizzly. Dark, dense, and menacing. It was pawing through a mound of earth, the very place Luna had once seen Naira and her cub playing. Tufts of dark fur still clung to the ice. The male snorted, growled, and clawed furiously at the ground, as if angry for being too late. He was looking for Naira and her cub. Luna instinctively stepped back, but the snow beneath her gave a faint crunch. Barely audible, but for a bear it was enough. The male's head jerked up. Their eyes met, one pair brimming with primal aggression, the other a human's gaze fighting to stand firm against a rising wave of fear. The bear hissed, then started toward her slow, deliberate steps. No charge, no roar, just a cold, measured threat. Luna drew her flare gun hands trembling, but before she could aim, a thunderous roar shattered the silence from across the trees. A fierce, wild, unrelenting bellow. Naira! She emerged like a snowstorm, fur bristling her massive frame, charging from the forest's edge, eyes ablaze not with fear, but with unwavering fury and resolve. The clash began. Luna ducked behind a boulder, eyes wide as the two titans collided. Brown fur and black mass smashed together in a raw primordial battle teeth, snapping claws, slashing snow, exploding into a blizzard of chaos. Growls and howls of calls echoed through the forest like war drums. The cold wind bit deeper. The scent of blood tainted the air. But Luna couldn't look away. She understood now the bond between her and Naira was no longer a coincidence. It was a strange symbiosis between human and wild-born, from mutual understanding and shared instincts for survival. And she also understood something else, something more painful. If Naira lost this fight, 3 lives would be at risk. And when the male bear struck hard, slamming Naira to the snowy ground, blood blooming beneath her, Luna knew. She couldn't stand by and do nothing. The snow kept falling silently, covering the blood-soaked battlefield between 2 fierce beasts. The rumbling roar of Naira had just faded when her massive body was slammed to the ground. A long gash from her shoulder to her flank oozed blood, staining her once earth-toned fur with crimson. Luna stood frozen behind the boulder, her heart pounding so loud she feared the forest itself could hear it. The gray male bear. The deep woods executioner roared, shaking its head as if to fling off its opponent's blood, then rose up. In that moment, Luna understood. If she did nothing, Naira would die. And if Naira died, the cub would be orphaned, the forest would lose a brave soul, and Luna would lose something more than salvation. She quietly opened the cap of her flare gun. One blast might scare the bear or enrage it further. There was no time left to calculate, only instinct and courage. She sprang from her hiding place, raising the gun to the sky. "Naira," she shouted, as if trying to awaken the mother bear's spirit one last time. Boom! The flare tore through the gray sky, exploding in a burst of brilliant red. For a moment, the entire forest seemed to catch fire. The blast made the male bear recoil, letting out a sharp guttural cry. It turned toward Luna, and in its eyes was not fear, but rage. She had broken the forest's rule. A trespasser dared to interfere in the beast's battle. The bear crouched, preparing to charge. Luna gripped the flare gun tighter, knowing it would do little. She didn't want to shoot again, but if she had to... Then a movement from the ground stopped them both. Naira was getting up. Slowly. Blood dripped into the snow, but her eyes were no longer dulled by weakness. They burned like a winter flame, not with fury, but with something deeper protection. She didn't roar, didn't hiss. She simply stepped forward one step at a time, placing herself between Luna and the male bear. Luna held her breath. No one moved. All three beings, human mother bear and predator, locked in a moment, stretched tight as a bowstring. And then, as if something in Naira's gaze made it reconsider, the male bear slowly backed away. No growl, no threat, just a silent retreat, like mist dissolving into the cold forest. Luna exhaled her entire body, limp with relief. She looked at Naira, bloodied but unbroken, standing tall like a queen of the wild. And in that shared glance, Luna realized something she would never forget. Naira had chosen not just to protect her cub. She had chosen to protect Luna. The wind howled in burst snow, whipping into white vortexes amidst the ancient forest. Luna knelt beside Naira, the friend who had just saved her, with nothing less than her life. Blood from the deep gash along the mother bear's flank still dripped onto the snow, forming crimson flowers in the cold. The cub stood a few steps away, its round black eyes trembling, unable to understand why its mother was no longer standing. It crept closer, nuzzling into Naira's body, whining softly as if calling her soul to return. Luna bit her lip hard, reaching out to touch the wound. The claw mark was deep long and oozing dark, thick blood. She opened her backpack, pulling out a first aid kit far too meager for a creature as large as Naira. But she couldn't just watch. She couldn't let a brave soul like Naira fade silently into the woods. "You saved me," Luna whispered, her hands shaking as she cleaned the wound with antiseptic gauze. "Now it's my turn." Naira didn't growl, didn't resist. She lay still, breathing heavily, yet her eyes remained alert, following Luna's every movement. That trust choked Luna with emotion. The cub curled up next to its mother. Luna took off her outer coat and draped it over Naira's body, sheltering them both. The wind still sliced through the trees, but around the three beings was a strange stillness, as if the entire forest was holding its breath, bearing witness to something extraordinary. The sun was sinking toward the horizon. Luna knew they couldn't spend the night here. If she did nothing, Naira would lose too much blood. But she couldn't carry a fully grown bear, weighing hundreds of kilos through snow-covered terrain. And then she remembered. Less than a kilometer away was an old ranger shelter once used as a wildlife observation outpost. Though abandoned, if the walls and roof were intact, it could be a perfect temporary refuge. Luna turned to the cub and pointed in that direction. "We have to help your mother. Come with me. Trust me." She knew bears didn't understand human words, but somehow the cub seemed to pick up on something in her eyes. It cautiously stepped toward her, glancing up at Naira. And as if an invisible command passed between their three hearts, Luna leaned down, placing a hand gently on Naira's back. "We're not leaving anyone behind. Let's go." She tightened the straps of her backpack to fashion a makeshift harness around Naira's body, and together with the cub began pushing inch by inch. The mother bear tried to stand, staggered, but did not collapse. A human. An injured mother bear and an orphaned cub. Three souls moving slowly through the frozen forest, not guided by instinct, but by hope. The mountain wind swept through narrow stone crevices, slicing through flesh down to the bone. But Luna didn't stop. She kept pushing, pulling, supporting Naira, the massive mother bear, who was now panting heavily. Her wounds no longer bleeding, but each step racked Luna's body with fear. Ahead, the trees thinned. Amidst the endless white expanse emerged a slanted, moss-covered, frost-laced wooden shack. It was the old ranger outpost she had visited years ago while surveying wildlife. Back then, it was abandoned, but solid now. It was their last hope. "We're here, Nera," Luna whispered almost to herself. The cub walked beside them, nuzzling its mother's legs, letting out soft, worried groans from time to time. Naira staggered but kept going, as if understanding that this was the only place in the wild where death might not find them tonight. Luna pushed the door. The rusted hinge creaked, but it opened. Inside was bare, a broken table, a few corroded metal crates, an old wood-burning stove, and dust caking everything. But most important, it had a roof, 4 walls, and no wind. She quickly gathered dry branches from the stash behind the shack, thankfully still usable. Her hands trembled as she lit the fire. The flames caught. The first flicker of light danced on Naira's wet fur as she and the cub helped her mother lie down beside the hearth. Smoke stung her eyes, but the tears in Luna's eyes weren't just from the smoke. She slumped down beside Naira, her hands shaking as she opened the first aid kit. Only a few gauze pads, a bottle of antiseptic, and a suture needle remained. "We can do this. We have to." She disinfected the wound again, applied pressure with the gauze, cut the bandage, and tied it tight. Naira shivered, but didn't resist. Each breath she drew was heavy, but steady. Hope remained. Outside, night fell hard. A blizzard began to roll in. Luna could hear the wind howling through the forest. Had they still been out there, they wouldn't have survived. The cub curled up its head, resting on Naira's belly. Luna pulled the last jacket from her pack and draped it over all three. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight in an abandoned, freezing cabin forgotten by time, 3 lives wildly different had woven themselves into a strange, silent family bound by survival trust and something beyond instinct. She gazed into the fire, the flames dancing as if telling the wild fairy tale of their own journey. Out in the storm, a fire had been lit, not only within the crumbling cabin, but within the hearts of the 3 beings huddled together inside. The morning after the storm was eerily quiet. The sun had just risen over the mountain ridge, casting a pale golden light through the mist onto the damp forest. Inside the dilapidated ranger outpost, Luna opened her eyes. She had barely slept the night before. Her arms still cradled the bear cub, who had curled up and fallen asleep on her lap, while Naira lay on the other side of the fireplace, her breaths slower and deeper than the day before, a good sign. She gave a weary smile. "We made it through, at least through the night." But then a sound, sharp, deliberate, not an animal, not the wind. Footsteps, human. Luna bolted upright. The cub startled awake and nestled into its mother. She immediately reached for her backpack, pulling out the handgun from its bottom compartment, the one she hadn't used in years of photographing the wild. She didn't want to use it, but this time, she might have to. A figure emerged from the edge of the forest, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing an orange hunting cloak, carrying a scoped rifle. He walked slowly, calmly, as if he already knew exactly what he would find here. Luna hid behind the rotting wooden wall, breathing fast. He was getting closer. "No need to hide," the man called out, voice cold and slick as melting ice. "I only want the bear, both mother and cub." Luna's heart clenched. "You're the one who shot Naira," she shouted, her voice trembling with anger and fear. "I know it. That mother's worth more than any picture you've ever taken," he sneered. "You don't get it, we're talking hundreds of thousands. The pelt, the claws, the head, every part. Luna stepped out, gun raised. "If you take one more step, I won't hesitate." The man paused, then smirked. "You won't shoot. You're the kind who cuddles cubs instead of running." Luna tightened her grip on the trigger. Maybe that was true before, but today no one touched Nira. No one. And then from behind the ground trembled. A deep, resonant growl rose from the forest's shadow behind the man. He turned. Nira somehow had risen. Blood still stained her fur, one leg limped, but her eyes, they blazed like fire in the snow. She was no longer a wounded bear. She was nature's fury, and a mother. The man lifted his rifle, but it was too late. Nira surged forward like a gray-brown storm, her roar shaking the trees. Luna screamed, firing a warning shot into the sky, but Nira didn't stop. The chaos lasted only seconds. When it was over, the poacher had vanished into the forest, leaving behind his rifle, a pair of gloves, and a smear of blood across the snow. Nira turned back. Her eyes no longer held rage, only pain. Luna ran to support her. "You did it, Nira. We're safe. But that wound—" The cub nuzzled into Luna, then into its mother. The three creatures curled together, trembling not just from the cold, but because they all understood what had just happened. The human world had reached the forest, and next time, they might not be so lucky. In that moment, Luna understood one thing with crystalline clarity. Nira and her cub could no longer survive in the shadows of the forest without someone to speak for them. And she knew that someone had to be her. The evening sun dipped behind the mountain range like a fading flame, casting the last golden rays through snow-covered pine branches. Luna sat beside Nira, carefully wiping the blood oozing from the wound on the mother bear's side. The cub curled against its mother, exhausted, but at peace. The silence around them was so deep that even the wind howling through the cracks in the ranger cabin walls sounded ghostly. Luna knew one thing with certainty: she couldn't stay here any longer. Nira needed real medical help, and that meant taking her somewhere Luna had never considered before: a government wildlife rescue center nearly 40 miles away, through forest trails up snowy ridges, and at least a full day's journey if nothing went wrong. She double-checked the map, then looked at Nira. The bear's gaze held no fear now, only a profound trust. Almost as if she was surrendering her fate into Luna's hands. "Nira," Luna whispered gently, stroking the thick, damp fur. "I can't let you die here. You've saved me twice. Now, it's my turn to repay you." The decision was made. Luna swiftly packed essential supplies, tied down a large tarp to use as a makeshift sled to pull Nira. The cub, still small and light enough, would be carried or strapped to her back when needed. The journey began under a gray sky. No rain, no snow, but danger in every breath. The snow was deep beneath her feet, each step slicing into her thighs. But Luna refused to stop. She knew these woods by heart, but never had she crossed them under such circumstances, dragging a wounded bear, caring for her cub, and staying ever alert for unseen dangers, night predators, or worse, humans. By nightfall, they stopped under a shallow rock overhang. Luna lit a fire, doing her best to keep Nira warm as she trembled in pain. The cub curled tightly against its mother eyes, never leaving Luna, not for a single second. From her pack, Luna pulled out her worn leather journal, where she'd always recorded thoughts after each expedition. But this time, the words that appeared weren't about wildlife sightings or camera settings. They were a vow. If they survive this journey, I will never again be just an observer. I can't just take a photo and walk away. Nature needs a voice, and maybe that voice is mine. That night, as the wind howled through the forest, like the earth itself mourning Luna, lay curled near Naira, one hand resting on the cub's paw. Her eyes closed, her body aching with exhaustion, but inside something glowed. Not just the will to save, but an awakening. A woman, a mother bear, a cub. 3 souls. One journey, carrying with them the fragile hope of a forgotten wild. Dawn slowly spread across the mist-covered pine trees, casting a pale glow over the thick snow. Luna felt her body numb from cold and exhaustion. But when she opened her eyes and saw that Naira was still breathing, however faintly, and the bear cub still curled beside her mother, strength returned to her heart. The journey through the forest resumed no longer the inspired wandering of a nature photographer, but a life-or-death transport. A woman pulling an injured adult grizzly bear across treacherous terrain, crossing streams, climbing icy ridges, trudging through knee-deep snow. By midday, Luna heard what she had longed for. The sound of engines. She rounded a low hillside and saw the familiar barbed wire fence, the Federal Conservation Bureau's Wildlife Rescue Station, a prefab outpost nestled deep in the woods where she'd once visited years ago to request photo permits. But this time, she didn't come with a camera. She came with blood on her hands and a fragile hope. The staff at the station were stunned when Luna emerged, dragging a half-dead grizzly into the yard. The first few seconds were tense wild bears. Even injured ones were dangerous. But Luna threw out her arms and shouted, "Don't shoot! She saved me! I'm begging you, save her!" The sincerity in Luna's voice stopped the vets and rangers in their tracks. And when they saw the bear cub, small, trembling, tucked inside Luna's jacket, like a lost puppy, all doubt melted away. Naira was taken to the emergency care unit. Luna wasn't allowed to follow. She stood outside, drenched in sweat and mud eyes glistening with tears, uncertain if she had done the right thing. And then, she saw the truth. Inside the central office on a security monitor, Luna saw footage she never expected a camera trap video from deep in the forest. The image was clear, a man with a hunting rifle aiming at Naira as she led her cub along the riverbank. A gunshot echoed. Naira roared, shielding her cub, then fled bloodied. He chased them. Not for survival, but for a trophy. "This is the man we've been investigating," a ranger said. "He's a poacher, a mother bear hunter. You stopped him without even knowing it." Luna couldn't breathe. But the biggest surprise was still to come. A woman entered the room. Silver hair, neatly tied reflective jacket over her uniform, the station director. She handed Luna a paper envelope. "We scanned the microchip inside Naira," she said. "She's not fully wild." Luna frowned. Naira was part of an orphaned bear rehabilitation program 7 years ago. She was rescued, cared for, and eventually released. She's known humans and remembered kindness. Luna collapsed into a chair. Naira had once been saved, and now she had saved Luna. Both of them survivors walking the thin line between wilderness and human society, between what we call wild and what is simply compassion. They were living proof of one thing. Kindness leaves a mark far deeper than any chain or fence ever could. 2 weeks had passed since Luna brought Naira and her cub to the rescue center. During that time, the forest seemed to sleep, but for Luna each day was a storm of emotion. She wasn't just a witness to a strange rescue, she was an inseparable part of it. Naira recovered slowly. The bullet wound had gone deeper than the vets initially thought, and the mother bear endured many fevers and nights of delirium. But she was never alone. Her cub was always curled beside her, and Luna every day sat by the mesh screen of the care unit, whispering words of encouragement like a loved one outside an ICU room. Then came a morning when the snow fell lightly, the sky blanketed in a layer of pearl-like mist. Luna was called into the office. "Naira is ready to return to the forest," said the station director, "and we believe you should be the one to send them off." That afternoon, the entire center seemed to hold its breath. A special transport vehicle carried Naira and her cub to the forest's edge, where all traces of humans ended and wilderness began. Luna stood before the cage door, her hands trembling as she unlatched the lock. Naira stepped out, not rushing. She stood there for a few seconds, her eyes no longer clouded, but clear as mountain spring water. The cub followed closely behind, brushing its nose against her leg. Luna held her breath. Naira turned back. In that moment, there was no growl, no roar, only a gaze still deep and knowing. A thank you, a farewell, a wordless song of parting. Then Naira turned away, leading her cub across the snowy ground, disappearing into the shadowy forest. Silently, the wild folded behind them like the curtain of a forgotten fairy tale. Luna stood there long after. The wind blew through her coat, tossing her hair toward the depths of the forest. She didn't cry. Instead, she smiled softly, as if she had just returned something precious to where it truly belonged. She knew she would never see Naira again. But that didn't matter. Because in those wild woods deep in the Montana wilderness, in a place once believed ruled only by survival and instinct, a mother bear had chosen forgiveness. A human had chosen sacrifice. And between them, something had taken root, not friendship, not mere gratitude, but a sacred bond between two souls who had crossed the threshold of survival and chose to save each other. And if you're still reading now, leave a message, a heart, a share, not just for Luna or Naira, but for all the stories still left unheard in the wild, where miracles don't need to roar to be felt, because sometimes the gentlest whispers are the wild's true voice.